I adopted it. So we got very interested in sugar here at UCSF after that. We actually have a group of us we call the Sugar Hill Gang. They're actually referenced in the book here. But my colleagues, Kristen Carnes, Laura Schmidt, and Stan Glantz, started looking at the paper trail of the food industry back in the 1960s and found the actual paper trail that showed that the food industry paid off scientists to exonerate sugar and figure saturated fat as the bad guy. We actually found their documents that showed the money transfer and the communications, just like what the January 6th committee is doing now, follow the money. And we actually proved that the sugar industry put their thumb on the scale back in the 1960s to exonerate their product, because there had been data that had been coming out at that point showing that sugar was not good for you. In fact, that's what John Yudkin found. Remember, Pure, White, and Deadly. And he had found, shown that data. And so people were starting to cast a fisheye at sugar. And so they had to go into overdrive mode to PR this problem away. And so they approached the chairman of the Department of Nutrition at the Harvard School of Public Health, Fred Stair, and his associate, Marg Hegstead, who ended up becoming the head of the U.S. Department of Agriculture in 1970, to pay them off $6,500 back then, which would be about $50,000 today, to write 2 review articles to appear in the New England Journal of Medicine that basically said saturated fat's the bad guy and sugar is no problem whatsoever. So that's the third aha moment. It's all a scam. The whole thing's a put-up job. And that's why I wrote Metabolic.
Sugar and alcohol. I don't think people commonly would put the two things together. People, I think, Joe Public, I think would think, okay, alcohol, I know if I drink too much, it's not good for me, it's going to cause problems with my liver. I think there's that understanding. And if I drink a little bit, have some days off a week, the odd glass of wine here and there is probably not going to be too bad for me. I think is what most people tend to think.
That's true. And if that were the case, that would be true. And that's true for about the 40% of Americans who are social drinkers. 40% are teetotalers, don't touch the stuff, okay. 40% are social drinkers, can pick up a beer, put it down like me. Okay, but 10% are binge drinkers and 10% are hardcore alcoholics.
Yeah. But I don't think people think of sugar in the same way in terms of what it does for the liver. And I think that's a really, eye-opening comparison for a lot of people. The other thing you said, which I think really beautifully ties into the start of this conversation, is that you started running an insulin reduction clinic.
Right.
And like you, I'm very passionate in root causes and this idea that we've labeled all these so-called separate diseases. We get taught about them at medical school as they're all separate entities. For this disease, you take this drug and you have this sort of treatment. And we look at that downstream pathology, don't we? But you mentioned mitochondria at the start in terms of what sugar or excess sugar can do to mitochondria. And that, mitochondrial dysfunction sits at the heart of so many different conditions. But also insulin resistance, right? So that insulin resistance, that insulin lowering clinic actually would probably, depending on who was coming in, I appreciate you're a pediatrician, but if all of us as doctors ran insulin reduction clinics,
we would get rid of 75% of the chronic disease in America, in the world.
Exactly. Go. It's that root cause again, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree, which is what I'm trying to, bring to, medicine. Unfortunately, medicine is provincial. Medicine doesn't, respond very well to, new ideas.
Yeah.
It's, it's a cartel, if you will.